The hall glittered like a palace that night. Golden chandeliers hung above us, their light falling like 1,000 stars across polished marble floors. The music of violins floated softly in the air, mingling with the hum of excited whispers. Laughter rang from one corner, the clinking of glasses from another. Every detail seemed perfect. Every sound, every sight painted a picture of joy, and for a moment, I believed I belonged there. I sat in the front row, my hands clasped tightly, trying to keep them from shaking. My heart swelled with pride as I looked at my son standing tall at the altar. He looked so much like me when I was younger. The same determined jawline, the same way of carrying his shoulders, but unlike me. He had everything I once dreamed for him: education, respect, a chance at happiness. My chest rose with pride, and for the first time in years I felt whole. I told myself silently, this is worth every sacrifice, every lonely night, every tear I kept hidden. Then it happened. I saw the bride lean close to my son. Her lips moved, delicate and careful, like a poisonous snake hissing without anyone noticing. But I heard it. Or maybe I didn't hear the words, but I felt them. The venom in her whisper carried through the air and reached me like a dagger aimed straight at my heart. Your father doesn't belong here. At first I thought I had imagined it. The music still played. The guests still smiled. The chandeliers still glowed. But then I saw his face. My son's smile faded. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by something colder, sharper. He turned his head slowly, and his gaze found me. For the first time in my life, I saw hatred in his eyes, directed at me. It was as if the floor beneath me cracked open, and I was falling into a darkness I couldn't escape. The joy in the hall didn't stop, but for me, everything froze. My breathing grew heavy, my chest tight. The violin strings seemed to shriek instead of sing. The whispers of the guests around me grew louder, sharper, like arrows piercing my skin. Across the room, I noticed her. My ex-wife. She sat there with her arms folded, lips curved into a smirk that cut deeper than any knife. Her eyes gleamed with satisfaction, as though she had been waiting for this very moment to see me crushed, humiliated, erased. The guests began to murmur, their heads turned in my direction, their eyes darting toward me, as though I were a stain on the polished floor. Some whispered behind their hands. Others smirked. A few pitied me. Each look was another blow to my dignity. My son didn't speak, not yet, but his silence was louder than thunder. His shoulders stiffened. His jaw tightened. His eyes, those eyes told me that the whisper had already poisoned him against me. I lowered my gaze, gripping the edge of the seat until my knuckles turned white. My chest burned, as if fire was trapped inside me, trying to escape. I wanted to stand up, to scream, to tell them all the truth, that I had given everything for that boy, that I had suffered silently just to see him happy. But I couldn't move. My body felt paralyzed, chained by shame. How did it come to this? I asked myself, how did I become a stranger in my own son's life? A shadow at his brightest moment. The music swelled, the ceremony continued. But for me, it was all drowned out by the sound of my own breaking heart. I remembered the nights I worked until my body ached. The mornings I skipped meals so he would never go hungry. The dreams I buried so his could bloom. And yet here I was, unwanted, despised, cast aside by the very people I had once called family. I lifted my head again, hoping for a glimpse of kindness in my son's eyes. But what I saw was distance. He leaned slightly away from me, closer to her, as though I were a danger to be avoided. The bride's lips curled into the faintest smile, a smile of victory. She had taken my son from me, not just as a wife, but as a weapon. The weight of the room pressed down on me. Every sound, every breath felt heavy. The perfume of roses filled my lungs, but instead of sweetness, it suffocated me. I could hear the faint laugh of someone behind me, and I knew it wasn't joy. It was laughter at me. My ex-wife adjusted her necklace, her smirk never fading. She tilted her head slightly, as if to say, "This is what you deserve." For a moment my vision blurred. I thought I might collapse right there on the polished floor, but I held myself still, refusing to let them see me fall. If I was going to be erased, I would at least go down standing, silent but unbroken. The bride whispered again, this time softer, her eyes sliding toward me with disdain. My son's shoulders dropped. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply looked at me, as though I were nothing more than a stranger who had wandered in by mistake. That look will haunt me forever. I felt the fire in my chest turn into ice. My pride, my dignity, all of it stripped away in front of those glittering chandeliers and judging eyes. The violin music continued its elegant song. But for me, it was a funeral march. I sat there motionless, my mind screaming with questions I couldn't answer. What have I done to deserve this? How did my love turn into his shame? When did my sacrifices become invisible? The ceremony moved forward, but I was no longer part of it. I was present in body, but absent in spirit. I was no father, no guest. I was an intruder. And in that moment, with the echo of her venomous whisper still burning in my ears, I realized something I never thought I would admit. I no longer belonged to my son's world. Not in that hall. Not in that marriage. Not in his heart. The lights shone brighter. The music played louder. The laughter grew stronger. Yet inside me, all was silent. Only one question circled endlessly in my mind. How did I become a stranger at my own son's wedding? His eyes didn't leave mine. Cold, hard, unforgiving. For a moment, I prayed I had misread him. That perhaps I only imagined the poison in his gaze. But then he stepped forward, his voice slicing through the music, sharp enough to silence even the violins. Why are you here? The words were not shouted. They were not whispered. They were spoken with a weight that froze the room. His tone was not of curiosity. It was accusation, as though my presence itself was a crime. I felt every guest turn to look at me. Their whispers stopped, replaced by a suffocating silence. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heart, louder than the orchestra, louder than anything. My lips parted, but no words came out. My tongue felt heavy. My chest felt hollow. I wanted to tell him, I'm here because I am your father. I'm here because this is the most important day of your life. I'm here because I love you. But those words were trapped inside me, drowning under the weight of his contempt. Beside him, the bride stood taller, her chin raised, her arm wrapped proudly around his. She clutched him like a prize she had won, her eyes flashing with triumph. She didn't need to speak. Her smirk said it all. You see, he doesn't want you here either. And then my ex-wife. There she was, arms folded across her chest, her lips curved in a smile that wasn't joyful. It was cruel. She had waited for this moment, to see me exposed, humiliated, diminished in front of everyone. Her eyes met mine, and without a single word, she told me, "You've lost. Completely." The guests shifted in their seats. Some leaned closer to one another, whispering like vultures circling the last breath of a dying animal. I caught their glances, some filled with pity, others with amusement. One man shook his head as though I was a fool. A woman raised her eyebrows as if to say, how embarrassing. And a few laughed quietly, hiding behind their hands, but not enough to spare me the sting. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the ground to open beneath me and swallow me whole. But I stayed seated, frozen. My son's voice came again, sharper, cutting through me like glass. I asked you, why are you here? Every syllable cracked something inside me. His tone was not the voice of the little boy who once clung to my hand when crossing the street. Not the voice of the child who begged me to read him bedtime stories. This voice belonged to a stranger who wanted nothing to do with me. I tried to swallow, my throat dry, my chest burning. The word barely escaped. My voice sounded small, even to me, weak. And in that weakness, I saw the bride's smile widen, my ex-wife's smirk deep. I dropped my gaze for a moment, just to breathe. My hands trembled in my lap. My nails dug into my palms. I told myself to stay calm, to not cry, not here, not in front of them, but inside. My soul ached so deeply. I thought it might break me in half. I looked up again, forcing myself to meet his stare. And what I saw there was not anger alone. It was shame. Shame of me, of who I was. He looked at me as though I were dirt beneath his polished shoes, as though I had no right to breathe the same air in this hall. And in that look, I realized something far worse than his anger. He wasn't just angry at me. He was embarrassed of me. That cut deeper than any words. The guests waited, hungry for more. It was a performance to them, a play unfolding before their eyes, and I was the fool. The uninvited character, stumbling through a scene that didn't want me. The music faltered. Even the orchestra seemed to sense the tension, their bows trembling against the strings. The air thickened, heavy with judgment. My heart beat faster, each thump echoing in my ears like a drum of doom. I opened my mouth again, desperate to say something, anything that might pierce through the walls built between us. But nothing came, because how do you explain years of sacrifice to a son who has already decided you are nothing? I remembered the nights I worked myself to exhaustion, the mornings I went without food so he could eat. I remembered the shoes I patched until they could not be patched again, just so he could have new ones. I remembered the dreams I buried, the dignity I swallowed, the life I gave away for him. And now, in this one moment, all of it was erased. All of it was forgotten. All of it was meaningless. I watched as he shook his head slightly, as if he couldn't believe my audacity. The bride leaned closer, her hand squeezing his arm, anchoring him to her side. She whispered something again, but I didn't need to hear the words. I already knew they were against me. My ex-wife shifted in her seat, uncrossing and recrossing her legs, her eyes never leaving me. She enjoyed the spectacle too much to even pretend to hide it. She wanted me to crumble. She wanted me broken. But I refused to give her that satisfaction. So I sat there, my body trembling, my chest hollow, my pride bleeding, but I kept my head lifted. Even as my son's rejection tore through me, even as the whispers around me grew sharper, even as every memory of love turned into ashes, I stayed still. I stayed silent. Because deep inside, one truth remained. They could strip me of my dignity, they could erase my sacrifices, they could bury me in shame, but they could never change the fact that I was his father. And no matter how much he hated me at that moment, that truth would never die. Still, as I sat there under the crushing weight of his rejection, I couldn't help but wonder, was being his father enough anymore? The past came rushing back that night, uninvited and merciless. As I sat in that hall, with whispers circling around me like vultures, my mind slipped backward, back to the years when everything began to rot. I remembered the day I first met her family. Their eyes scanned me from head to toe, not with curiosity, but with judgment. Her father's lips curled as though the very sight of me offended him. Her mother looked me over like I was some broken piece of furniture brought into their mansion, and she, my future wife, stood there with pride in her eyes, knowing her family's wealth made her untouchable. From the start, I was treated as less than, too poor, too simple, not worthy of their daughter. But she had insisted. She told them she loved me, that she didn't care about money, status, or their disapproval. I was young, foolish. I believed her words were stronger than their poison. But once the wedding was over, their true colors bled through. Her arrogance grew like a storm that never passed. She criticized everything, my job, my clothes, the way I spoke, the friends I kept. Nothing was ever good enough for her. She measured me not by the weight of my love, but by the weight of my wallet, and in her eyes I was always empty. Her family visited often, their presence like a shadow over our home. They made remarks that stung, though disguised as jokes. A man should provide more than just bread and rice. A husband should give his wife the life she deserves. Not this modest place. Each word cut me, but I swallowed the pain, forcing myself to smile for my son's sake. I still see those nights as clearly as if they were yesterday. The slammed doors echo in my memory, the bitter arguments that shook the walls. Her voice sharp, mine trembling, the silence afterward more painful than the shouting. She would hurl words at me like stones. Failure, burden, embarrassment, and each time I felt myself shrinking a little more. But the worst part wasn't her voice. It was the sound of my son's small footsteps on the staircase. He would sit quietly, just out of sight, watching with wide, frightened eyes. Sometimes I caught him there, clutching the railing with tiny fingers, trying to understand the storm below him. And when our eyes met, I saw the confusion in his face, the fear, the question he didn't dare ask, "Why don't you fight back, father?" I couldn't answer him then, because the truth was, I stayed silent for him. Every insult I endured, I told myself it was for his future. Every humiliation I swallowed, I told myself it would give him stability. I convinced myself that my suffering was the price of his peace. But children notice more than we realize. And slowly I began to see it. The shift in him, the way he leaned closer to his mother, listening to her words, repeating her views. The way he began to look at me, not as his hero, but as the man she described. Weak, small, unworthy. Those seeds were planted early. Seeds of poison, watered daily by her scorn and her family's greed. I thought love would protect him from their influence. I thought he would see the truth for himself. But as I sat in that wedding hall, staring into his cold eyes, I realized those seeds had grown into thorns, and now they cut me without mercy. There were nights when I wanted to walk away, nights when I packed a bag in silence, thinking I could no longer endure. But then I would hear my son's laughter in his room, soft and innocent, untouched by the bitterness around him. That laughter pulled me back every time. I stayed, even when my dignity begged me to leave. But staying came at a cost. Day by day, piece by piece, I lost myself. I lost my voice, my pride, my joy. What remained was only a shell of the man I once was. A shell that his mother could mock and he could learn to despise. And now, sitting in the grand hall of his wedding, I felt the full weight of those years pressing down on me. My ex-wife's smirk wasn't new. It was the same look she gave me every time she broke me down. The bride's venomous whisper wasn't new either. It was only an echo of his mother's voice passed down like an inheritance. And my son's eyes? They were the final proof that the poison had taken root long ago. That was the moment I understood. The humiliation I faced at his wedding wasn't born that night. It was born years earlier, in slammed doors, bitter words, and the silent eyes of a child who watched his father crumble. And now, the harvest of that poisoned past was here, cutting into my soul. The night I lost everything still lives inside me. It was raining. The kind of rain that doesn't fall softly but crashes down like the sky itself is breaking apart. The streets were slick with water, shining under the dim glow of streetlights. Thunder rolled in the distance, and every crack of lightning lit up the truth I didn't want to face. That night, my marriage ended. The house that I had built with my own hands, the walls I had painted, the roof I had repaired in storms, the floors I had walked barefoot with my son, it was no longer mine. I was no longer welcome there. My ex-wife stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her face cold as stone. Behind her, the warm lights of the house glowed, mocking me as I stood outside, drenched and shivering. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply said, "Leave. This is no longer your place." And I left. Not because I wanted to, but because there was nothing left for me to fight with. The rain plastered my shirt against my skin, every drop soaking through until I felt heavier than the suitcase I carried. That suitcase, it held almost nothing. A few shirts, a pair of worn shoes, some papers. That was all I was allowed to take from years of struggle, years of building a life. She kept the rest. The furniture, the savings, the house, and most painfully, she kept my son. I remember turning back one last time, hoping, praying that he would run after me, that he would beg me to stay, or at least wave from the window. But instead, he stood in the hallway, his little shoulders stiff, his mother's hand gripping. His face was pale, his eyes filled with something I couldn't name. And then he spoke. Failure. One word. Just one. But it was enough to break me. The rain drowned out everything else. I don't even remember closing the gate. I don't remember how far I walked before my knees nearly gave out. I only remember that word, echoing again and again in my head. Failure. Spoken not by my enemies, not by strangers, but by the very child I had worked my whole life for. I had carried him on my shoulders when he was small, even when my back ached from long hours of work. I had starved so he could eat. I had endured humiliation so he could have a home. And yet, in that moment, all he saw was a man unworthy. The rain hid my tears that night, but inside, I was screaming. I wanted to shout back. I am not a failure. I am your father. Everything I am, I gave for you. But the words stayed trapped in my throat. So I walked. Every step away from that house felt like walking through mud, heavy and impossible. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. All I knew was that I had been cast out, stripped of everything, left only with the shell of my dignity. The storm raged on, but the real storm was inside me. The betrayal of my wife, the loss of my home, the knife of my son's voice. I kept walking until the house lights were gone, swallowed by the darkness. Only then did I stop. I stood under a broken street lamp, the rain pouring down on me, and I realized I had nothing left. No shelter, no family, no purpose. But even then, in the middle of that storm, a small voice inside me refused to die. It whispered that I still had my name. I still had my will. It could strip me of wealth, of home, even of love, but not of the truth of who I was. That night, I was cast into the rain with nothing. But that night also planted the seed of something else, something I wouldn't understand until years later. The seed of survival. Even after that night in the rain, when I walked away with nothing but a broken heart and a suitcase of old clothes, my love for my son never ended. It couldn't. A father's love doesn't vanish, no matter how deep the wound, no matter how sharp the rejection. From the shadows, I still watched him grow. Not openly, not proudly, but quietly, like a ghost on the edges of his life. I followed his milestones through whispers from relatives, through photographs passed around at family gatherings I was no longer invited to, through chance encounters when neighbors mentioned how well he was doing. Each word about him felt like a knife and a blessing at the same time. I heard about his grades first, how he had topped his class in science. I wasn't there to help him with homework, but I secretly sent money to cover his school fees. I never signed my name. I used a cousin, pretending the money came from somewhere else. Anywhere else. Because I knew if he discovered it was from me, he would refuse it. His mother would never allow it, but I kept sending what little I could, even if it meant I skipped meals or wore the same shirt for months. Birthdays were the hardest. I used to plan them with so much joy when he was small, baking cakes with trembling hands, wrapping toys I could barely afford. After the divorce, I still bought him gifts. A book one year, a watch the next, a pen when he entered college, but I could never hand them to him myself. Instead, I asked an uncle, a friend, even a neighbor to deliver them. Always under the name of someone else. Always from the shadows. And every year, I imagined his hands tearing the wrapping, his face lighting up. I lived for that image, even though I would never see it. I watched from a distance as he grew taller, stronger, more confident. I saw him walk to school, his bag heavy on his shoulders, his steps quick with purpose. I wanted to run to him, to walk beside him, to ask about his dreams. But I stayed hidden. I told myself it was better this way, that forcing myself into his life would only bring him more pain, more confusion. It felt like tending to a garden that belonged to another man. I watered it with sacrifices he would never know, nurtured it with love he would never feel, and stood outside the fence as the flowers bloomed. They weren't mine to touch anymore, only to admire from afar. When he entered university, I wept in silence. Not because I was sad, but because I was proud. He had made it. He had become everything I prayed for, everything I worked for, and though he never looked for me, though he never said my name, I whispered a blessing for him every night before I closed my eyes. Sometimes I saw him in public places, at a bus stop, in the market, once even in the park. He walked past me without noticing. To him I was just another stranger. But to me, he was still my boy, the little child who once held my finger with his tiny hand. I ached to call out to him, to remind him who I was, but my voice never rose. Instead, I smiled softly, letting him pass, holding the memory in my chest like a secret treasure. There were nights when the loneliness consumed me, when I lay awake in a small, dimly lit room, wondering if he ever thought of me. If he ever remembered the bedtime stories, the piggyback rides, the moments of laughter before the storm. And even when the answer felt like no, I still prayed for his safety, his health, his happiness. He never knew. He never knew about the money. He never knew about the gifts. He never knew about the prayers whispered into the silence. But I knew, and that was enough to keep me alive. Because even if I had been erased from his life, I refused to erase him from my heart. Their wealth was on full display that night, shining brighter than the chandeliers above us. Diamonds dripped from their necks, bracelets clinked like chains of arrogance on their wrists, and silk gowns rustled with every smug movement. The bride's family had arrived at the wedding not just as guests, but as rulers of the evening. Every gesture, every laugh, every glance carried the weight of pride. I watched them from my seat, their table glowing with gold-trimmed plates and glasses filled with wine that caught the light like fire. They spoke loudly as if the hall itself belonged to them, their voices spilling with entitlement. And when their eyes occasionally flickered toward me, I saw it, the disdain they didn't bother to hide. To them, I was not the father of the groom. I was a stain, a shadow clinging to the edges of their perfect portrait. I heard the whispers. I wasn't meant to, but whispers are louder when they're about you. Why was he even invited? Doesn't he understand this is not his place? He looked so out of place, almost pitiful. Their words slithered across the hall, wrapping around me like a noose. The bride herself moved with a practiced elegance. Her every smile calculated, her every glance meant to impress. But when her eyes landed on me, the mask slipped. Her lips curled ever so slightly, her gaze cold. She looked at me not as a father-in-law, Not even as a man, but as an obstacle she wished erased from the evening. She clung to my son's arm, squeezing it gently, making sure everyone saw who truly held power over him. He was her victory, her prize. And in her victory, there was no space for me. My ex-wife fit into their world as though she had been waiting for it all her life. She sat proudly among them, her posture regal, her jewelry glinting under the lights, her smile polished and cruel. She laughed at their jokes, added her own venom. When the topic turned toward me, "He was never enough," she told one of them, loud enough for others to hear. "Look at him now, doesn't he prove me right?" Her words were a dagger, but what made them unbearable was the laughter that followed. Their fake smiles never reached their eyes. Their eyes told the truth, sharp, judgmental, hungry for my humiliation. They wanted me small, diminished, invisible, and in their world of golden glass, I was nothing but a reminder of imperfection. I noticed the way they flaunted their wealth, not to celebrate, but to dominate. Rings were flashed across conversations like trophies. Watches gleamed as wrists lifted in deliberate gestures. Even the way they sipped their drinks carried arrogance, as though the very act of drinking in front of me declared my poverty. The bride's father leaned back in his chair, his laughter booming, his hand resting on the table as if he owned not just the hall but everyone in it. He didn't look at me often, but when he did, his eyes narrowed with disgust. To him, I was unworthy of sitting under the same lights, unworthy of being near his daughter, unworthy of sharing his family's heir. And yet, I sat there, silent. My chest heavy, my dignity bleeding quietly beneath their scorn. It wasn't just their wealth that humiliated me. It was their pride, their certainty that they had won, that by marrying their daughter into my son's life, they had erased me completely. My son no longer looked for me. He no longer needed me. To them, that was proof of their triumph. And as I watched their jewelry sparkle, their fake smiles gleam, I realized something that tightened the ache in my chest. They weren't just humiliating me. They were celebrating it. This was not just a wedding for them. It was a coronation, a moment where they stood taller by pushing me deeper into the ground. And my ex-wife, once the woman who shared my home, now stood proudly with them, her eyes glowing with satisfaction as if she had finally claimed her rightful place. I sat in silence, my dignity wrapped in chains of their arrogance. But deep inside, a voice whispered, "Let them laugh. Let them glow. Pride burns brightest before it turns to ash." I couldn't take it anymore. The music, the whispers, the laughter, they all pressed against me like walls closing in. My chest felt tight, my breath shallow, my dignity shattered. Every glance toward me was another cut, every smirk another wound. So I rose, slowly, quietly, not to cause a scene, not to fight, just to escape. The chair scraped softly against the polished floor, but even that sound felt too loud, as if the whole hall had turned to hear it. My legs trembled as I pushed myself up, but I forced them to move, one step, then another. My eyes stayed low, fixed on the floor, afraid of meeting anyone's gaze. I could still hear the bride's family laughing, their voices dripping with arrogance. My ex-wife's sharp chuckle cut through the air like glass. Even my son's silence felt heavy, a rejection that rang louder than words. Every sound from that hall followed me like chains dragging across stone. I reached the back, the doors towering before me. For a second I hesitated. I thought of turning back, of trying one last time to claim my place. But pride held me still. I would not beg. I would not plead in front of those who already believed me unworthy. So I gripped the handle, pushed the heavy doors, and stepped out. The night hit me like ice. Cold air rushed against my face, mixing with the sting of tears I had tried so hard to hold back. The rain had stopped, but the ground was wet, reflecting the lights of the hall like broken glass. Fireworks exploded in the distance, bright colors painting the sky in celebration. Yet to me, they felt like mockery. Each burst of light a reminder of joy I could not share. I walked slowly down the steps, each step heavier than the last. My chest burned, my throat tight. Behind me, the laughter carried faintly through the doors, muffled but cruel. It was as though the entire world inside that hall was rejoicing in my absence. I pulled my coat tighter around me, though it did little to shield me from the chill. My shoes splashed softly against the wet pavement, the sound echoing in the empty night. For the first time in years, I felt truly alone, not just without a family, without a place, without even the dignity of being seen as a father. I paused under a street lamp, its light dim, flickering against the darkness. My shadow stretched long across the wet ground, fragile and thin. I stared at it, realizing how small I had become in their eyes, how invisible. The fireworks continued above, loud and bright. The colors reflected in the puddles at my feet. But I couldn't look up. I couldn't celebrate. All I could see was my son's face. Cold and distant, as if I had no place in his story anymore. I took another step, and it felt like leaving more than just the wedding hall. It felt like leaving a lifetime behind. Every sacrifice, every silent prayer, every moment of love, I carried them all on my back, but they felt like ashes now, slipping through my fingers. The night swallowed me, its silence heavy and merciless. I didn't know where I was walking. I didn't care. All I knew was that I had been cast out once again. This time not by a wife, but by the son I had given my soul for. And as the fireworks cracked above me, their colors bursting in triumph, I whispered into the cold air the truth I could no longer keep inside. I am still his father, even if he has forgotten. The night after the wedding, I wandered the streets like a man without a home. The city lights blurred through my tears, and every step felt heavy, dragging me deeper into despair. I ended up in a small tea shop, the kind that stays open long after midnight. Its yellow bulbs flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the cracked wooden tables. I sat in the corner, soaked in silence, staring at a cup of tea that had long gone cold. I thought I was alone. I thought no one in this world still cared if I lived or died. But then a voice called my name. A voice I hadn't heard in years. "Is it really you?" I looked up. At first I couldn't believe my eyes. There he was. Imran. My old friend, my brother in all but blood. We had shared days of struggle in our youth, worked side by side when times were hard. He was the one I had once stood up for, years ago when others abandoned him, and now, after all this time, he stood before me with the same warm smile, though older, lined by years, touched with gray. I tried to smile, but my lips trembled instead. The sight of him cracked something inside me, and for the first time since the wedding, I felt tears spill freely down my face. He didn't mock me, he didn't look away. He simply pulled out a chair and sat across from me. "What happened to you?" he asked softly. And for the first time in years I told someone everything. The marriage, the insults, the night in the rain, the long years of silence. And finally the humiliation at my son's wedding. Every word poured out of me like poison. I had carried too long. My hands shook as I spoke, my voice breaking again and again. Yet Imran listened, his eyes never leaving mine. He didn't interrupt. He didn't pity me. He just listened, his silence a comfort I hadn't felt in decades. When I finally stopped, my chest felt hollow, as though I had given away the last pieces of myself. I lowered my head, ashamed of how broken I sounded. But then he reached across the table, placed his hand firmly over mine, and said, "Brother, you are not finished. You are not a failure. You have carried more than any man should, and still, you are standing. That is not weakness. That is strength." His words struck me harder than any insult ever had, because they were true, and they were spoken with the kind of loyalty only an old friend could carry. I asked him how life had treated him. To my surprise, he had done well. After years of toil, he had built a small business into something respected. He knew people. He had connections, influence, and above all, wisdom. Yet he never flaunted it. His voice was steady, humble, filled with genuine care. That night he refused to let me walk alone. He took me to his home, a modest but warm place filled with light and kindness. His wife welcomed me without question. Her smile gentle, her eyes free of judgment. For the first time in years, I sat at a table where no one whispered about my failures. For the first time in years, I ate a meal without shame choking every bite. Afterward, when the house grew quiet, Imran sat with me again. "I know what they've done to you," he said. "But the truth, it doesn't stay buried forever. People may try to bury it with lies, with pride, with wealth. But truth has its own way of rising. You will see it, and when you do, you must be ready." His words planted something inside me. A spark, small, fragile, but real. I had been walking through darkness for so long that I had forgotten what hope even looked like. And now, sitting across from the one man who had never forgotten me, I began to feel it again. We talked deep into the night, about the past, about the mistakes, about the road ahead. He promised me that I was not alone anymore, that he would stand with me, just as I once stood with him. And in his voice, I heard no lies, no pity, only truth. By the time I lay down to sleep in the spare room he offered me, my heart still ached, but it no longer felt hollow. The humiliation of the wedding still burned, but it no longer felt eternal. For the first time in years, I closed my eyes not with despair, but with the faintest whisper of faith. Because an old friend had returned. Because I was no longer walking alone. Because maybe, just maybe, the truth would surface one day. The days that followed were different. For the first time in years, I wasn't drowning alone. Imran stood beside me, steady as a rock, reminding me that the storm I faced could still be weathered. He didn't just listen, he acted. He told me something I had almost forgotten. Lies always leave trails. We just have to follow them. So we began. Our search started quietly. Imran knew people, old colleagues, neighbors, even men who had once worked for the bride's family. Over tea, over cigarettes, and whispered conversations in the back of shops, pieces of truth began to fall into place. And each piece struck me harder than the last. The bride's family, those arrogant faces that had laughed at my humiliation, were not as clean as they pretended. Beneath the glitter of their diamonds and the shine of their silk gowns was rot. There were stories of unpaid debts, of businesses ruined by their greed, of land taken from the poor with threats and bribes. People spoke in hushed tones, afraid to be overheard. But once they realized I wasn't there to exploit them, they opened up. One man told us about a factory worker injured on their property, left without compensation. Another spoke of loans taken and never repaid, the burden falling on small families who couldn't fight back. Each story lit a fire inside me. But it wasn't only them. The more we dug, the more I discovered about my ex-wife. She hadn't simply turned my son against me with words. She had manipulated everything. Finances, records, even the gifts I had sent. Some she claimed as her own. Others she twisted into lies, telling him they came from family friends, never from me. She had poisoned every gesture of love, erasing me not just from his present, but from his memories. One night, Amran and I sat surrounded by papers. Old ledgers and copies of documents we managed to get through quiet favors. The room smelled of dust and ink, the table cluttered with evidence. I traced my fingers across a receipt I had once signed, money I had sent for my son's tuition. My chest tightened when I saw the note scribbled on the margin, my ex-wife's handwriting disguising the source, claiming the payment as hers. I closed my eyes, fists trembling. Years of sacrifice, stolen, years of love, rewritten as lies. I remembered my son's face at the wedding, his cold eyes, his bitter words, and now I understood. He hadn't just grown distant. He had been fed lies his whole life, lies that turned his love into shame, his respect into contempt. The anger inside me was heavy, dangerous, but it didn't consume me. Instead, it carved something sharp inside my chest. Resolve. We dug deeper. At a cafe one afternoon, Imran leaned closer, his voice low. You should know this too, your ex-wife and the bride's family. They've been working together for years. It's not just about pride, it's about power. They see your son as their key, his position, his future, his name. You were pushed out because you didn't fit their empire. His words hit me like a blow. My son, my flesh, my blood was nothing more than a pawn in their games. And I had been erased because I stood in the way. One evening, as we walked through the market, I overheard two men talking near a spice stall. They didn't notice me listening. Their words were casual, careless, but they carried weight. The girl's family covered up that scandal well, one said. If it ever got out, they'd lose everything. The other man laughed, shaking his head. Money buys silence. Always. I froze, my heart pounding. Another secret, another piece of the puzzle. Their empire wasn't built on respect, it was built on silence, bought and enforced. I turned to Imran that night, my voice steady though my chest was on fire. They took my dignity, they turned my son against me. But the truth is out there, waiting, and I won't rest until it's seen. He looked at me, his eyes shining with the kind of loyalty I had almost forgotten existed. Then we'll find it. Together. As I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of his home, the weight of years pressed down on me. But this time, I didn't feel crushed. I felt sharpened. Every lie uncovered was not just pain, it was fuel. Every betrayal revealed was not just sorrow, it was a reason to stand again. I had lived in silence too long. I had endured humiliation too long. Now with every dusty paper, every whispered secret, every shocking revelation, I could feel it. The tide was turning. The lies that had buried me were crumbling. And when the truth rose, I would rise with it. Change didn't come overnight. It came slowly, like the first light of dawn creeping across a dark sky, but with Amran at my side, guiding me, reminding me of the man I used to be, I began to rise again. He pushed me to reach out to people I thought had long forgotten me. Old contacts, men I once worked with, people who had seen me fall and turned away. At first I hesitated. Shame clung to me like a second skin. But Imran said, "Let them see who you are now, not who they told you to be." So I tried. One phone call, one meeting, one conversation at a time. To my surprise, doors began to open. Some remembered the times I had helped them years ago. Others admitted they had heard the lies but never believed them completely. They welcomed me back, not with pity but with respect that I thought I had lost forever. Work returned to me in small steps. A project here, a consultation there. Nothing grand at first, but enough to remind me that I still had worth. I poured myself into each task, every detail polished, every promise kept. Slowly, word spread. My name, once dragged through the dirt, began to shine again. People spoke of my honesty, my dedication, the way I never gave up even when everything was taken from me. And then came the relatives. The ones who once whispered behind my back, who smirked when they saw me in torn clothes, who treated me like I was invisible. I began to notice the change in their eyes. Where once there was mockery, now there was hesitation. Where once there was arrogance, now there was respect. Some lowered their heads when they greeted me, as though ashamed of the way they had once treated me. Others tried to start conversations, their voices soft, uncertain, almost guilty. I didn't gloat. I didn't throw their past cruelty back in their faces. I simply nodded, accepted their greetings, and carried myself with dignity. Because dignity, I had learned, was not something they could give me. It was something I rebuilt with my own hands. One evening, I stood outside after a meeting, the air cool against my skin. I looked up at the sky, remembering the night I was cast into the rain with nothing. And I realized how far I had come since then. I was no longer that broken man, shivering on the street, weighed down by shame. I was standing taller now, not because others had lifted me, but because I had chosen to rise. Imran often reminded me, "Brother, fire may burn, but ashes can still breathe life. You are proof of that." And he was right. Every humiliation, every insult, every lie that had tried to bury me had become fuel for my resolve. Even my son, though he still kept his distance, heard of my name resurfacing. I knew because whispers reached me. A cousin mentioned that he seemed surprised, even unsettled by how people now spoke of me. Perhaps slowly, the image they painted of me was beginning to crack in his mind. I didn't rush it. I didn't demand his respect back. I focused on myself, on walking with my head high, on proving through actions that I was not the failure they had branded me as. And deep inside, I felt something return, something I thought I had lost forever. Pride, not the arrogant kind, but the quiet pride of a man who has been broken and still stands. Life didn't suddenly become easy, but it became mine again, and with every step forward, every nod of respect, every hand that reached out to greet me, I knew the truth. I was no longer the man they had cast aside. I was the man who rose from ashes. It happened on a night much like the wedding. A grand gathering, chandeliers gleaming, tables dressed in silk, music swelling through the air. The bride's family had organized it, another show of wealth and power. They loved such spectacles. For them, gatherings were not about family, but about performance. About reminding everyone who they were, how much they owned, how untouchable they seemed. I was there, though not as a guest of honor. My presence was tolerated, not welcomed. I could feel it in the glances cast my way, in the whispers that trailed behind me. But this time, I didn't bow my head. I didn't shrink into the corner. I sat quietly, calmly, my heart steady, because I knew what was coming. The hall glittered with arrogance. Men in tailored suits bragged about their business ventures. Women draped in gold whispered about vacations and diamonds, and the bride, adorned in silk and jewels, floated through the room with her chin high. Her arm hooked tightly around my son's, her eyes carried the same cold disdain I had seen at the wedding. She believed her place was secure, her family's power unquestionable. But truth is a patient hunter. It waits in the shadows, biding its time, until the moment comes when even the strongest mask cannot hold. That night, the mask broke. It began with a guest, an older man, once a business partner of the bride's father. He spoke softly at first, but anger sharpened his voice. "You boast here, but have you told them how you ruined my company? How your lies left my workers hungry?" His words cut through the music, and silence fell. All eyes turned. The bride's father laughed, dismissing it with a wave of his jeweled hand. Old grudges. Nothing more. But the old man didn't stop. He pulled out papers, contracts, proof. His voice shook, not with weakness but with rage carried for years. And then others joined in. Another man spoke of land stolen, a woman of money owed. Each voice rising, layering over the last until the hall buzzed with accusations too loud to ignore. I sat still, my hands folded, my face calm. Inside, my heart pounded, not with fear, but with a deep, quiet satisfaction. The truths Imran and I had uncovered were no longer whispers in the dark. They were spoken openly now, under the golden light of the chandeliers. The bride's family tried to fight back. Her father shouted. Her mother clutched her pearls, pretending to faint from insult. But the crowd was no longer convinced. Their eyes, once full of admiration, now filled with doubt. The same mouths that once laughed at me now whispered against them. And the bride, how quickly her pride crumbled. Her face flushed. Her smile faltered. She tried to keep her chin high, but her eyes darted nervously across the room. She squeezed my son's arm, but this time it wasn't pride. It was desperation. She wanted him to shield her, to stand against the tide, but even he looked shaken, confused, torn between the woman he married and the truth unfolding before him. I didn't gloat. I didn't rise or speak. I simply watched, steady as stone, while the same fire that once burned me now turned against them. Their glittering jewelry seemed gaudy under the weight of shame. Their golden chairs felt like thrones of sand. The hall that once echoed with their laughter now vibrated with doubt, anger, and betrayal. One by one, the guests who had mocked me shifted their loyalties. They whispered, "I always suspected. I heard rumors. It makes sense now." The same lips that once branded me a failure now spit venom toward the bride's family. I caught the bride's eyes once. For the first time, she looked away. She lowered her head, hiding behind her veil of jewels, as if the ground itself might open and swallow her. The proud queen of the wedding had become a cornered woman, shrinking under the weight of truth. In that moment, I understood something. Justice does not always roar. Sometimes it arrives quietly, slipping through cracks, unraveling lies piece by piece until nothing remains. That night, justice didn't come in the form of revenge, but in the form of exposure. The proud had been brought low. The arrogant had been unmasked. And for the first time, I wasn't the one carrying shame. As I left the gathering, the night air cool against my face. I walked with my head high. Behind me, their empire of arrogance crumbled under the simple, undeniable weight of truth. And I thought to myself, let them feel now what they once made me feel. Let them taste the bitterness of humiliation. For the truth spares no one. It was late when he finally came to me. The night after the gathering had torn the masks from the bride's family, I sat alone in my small room, the lamp flickering weakly beside me. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that presses on your chest. I was lost in thought, replaying the years of humiliation. When a knock came at the door, both hesitant, almost afraid. I rose slowly, my body heavy with age and memory. When I opened the door, there he was. My son. For a moment, I simply stared at him, unable to believe it. He looked different that night. Not the proud groom standing tall beside his bride. Not the cold man who once asked me why I dared to come. He looked smaller somehow, his shoulders bent, his face pale. His eyes were wet. "Father," his voice cracked on the word, as though it hurt to say it. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick, heavy with everything left unsaid for years. Finally, he stepped inside, his hands trembling at his sides. He didn't sit. He didn't smile. He simply stood there, broke. "I was wrong," he whispered. His voice shook, his throat tight. "All these years, I was blind. I let them fill me with poison. I believed every word they told me about you. I thought you were nothing. I thought you had abandoned me. But last night I saw the truth." His words poured out like water from a shattered vessel. He spoke quickly, desperately. as though afraid I might send him away before he finished. He told me how he now understood the manipulation, the lies his mother had fed him, the masks the bride's family had worn. He admitted he had repeated their words, carried their scorn, and thrown it at me without ever questioning it. "I called you a failure," he said, his voice breaking. "And I see now it was me who failed you." He sank to his knees before me then, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking, his hands clutched at his face as sobs tore through him. I had imagined this moment countless times in my darkest nights, but never like this. I had dreamed of anger, of shouting, of demanding he feel the pain he gave me. But now, seeing my grown son broken before me, all I felt was a wave of sorrow and love crashing together inside me. I lowered myself to the floor beside him, my knees aching, my hands trembling as I reached for his shoulder. His body shook beneath my touch, and when he looked up, I saw it. His tears, his regret, his boyhood innocence breaking through the pride that had buried it for so long. "I wasted years hating you," he cried. "Years I should have spent learning from you, loving you. I let them steal you from me. And now I don't know if you can ever forgive me." His words pierced me deeper than all the insults I had endured at that wedding. Because this was not the voice of arrogance anymore. This was the voice of a son who had finally seen the truth, and was terrified it was too late. My own eyes blurred. My throat closed. I wanted to hold him like I did when he was small, when he scraped his knee and ran to me for comfort. But he was no longer a child. He was a man, and yet, in that moment, he wept like a boy who had found his way back home after being lost for too long. I cupped his face in my hands, my fingers wiping away the tears streaming down his cheeks. My voice trembled as I spoke. "My son, I have suffered much. You cut me deeply. But you are my blood. You are my life. And a father's heart cannot stay closed to his child." His sobs grew harder at my words, his forehead pressing against my chest, his arms wrapping around me tightly as though he feared I might disappear. I held him there, my own tears falling into his hair, mixing grief with forgiveness. We stayed like that for what felt like hours. Father and son, broken and mended at the same time. The years of distance, of lies, of betrayal, all weighed on us. But in that moment, something stronger rose above it. Love. Love that had been buried, but never destroyed. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were swollen, his breath uneven. "I will make it right," he promised. "I will honor you. I will stand with you. I will never let them erase you again." I looked at him, my boy, my man, and I saw the truth in his eyes. He meant it. For the first time in years, I saw not contempt, not shame, but respect. And though my heart still carried scars, it also carried hope. Because my son's tears had washed away the last of the lies. And in their place, the bond between father and son had been reborn. She couldn't let it go. Even after the bride's family had been unmasked. Even after whispers of their corruption spread like fire through the community, my ex-wife still clung to her pride. She had lived too long on lies, too long on control, and to her, my rising name was a threat she could not tolerate. So she tried again. At a small gathering, with relatives seated around her, she raised her voice. "Do not be fooled," she said, her eyes fixed on me. "He is still the same man he always was. Weak, worthless. Everything he has now, he owes it to others. Without them, he would still be nothing." Her words cut through the room, sharp and bitter. For a moment, the guest shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us. Once, such accusations would have left me silent, bowed, unable to defend myself. But not this time, because this time, I had truth. Amran rose from his chair before I could speak. Calm, steady, he laid the documents we had uncovered onto the table. Records, receipts, proof of payments I had made for my son's education, evidence of her manipulation, her theft, her deceit. His voice was even, but his words were sharp. "Enough of your lies. The truth is here, and it cannot be hidden anymore." The room fell silent. Relatives leaned closer, eyes scanning the papers. They saw the handwriting, the signatures, the undeniable marks of her dishonor. Murmurs spread like ripples across the room. And slowly, heads turned, not toward me, but toward her. Her face drained of color. She tried to laugh, to dismiss it all as fabrication, but her voice shook. "These are nothing but tricks," she insisted. "He forged them. He planned this." But no one believed her. Not this time. Then my son stood, His voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with every word. Mother, stop. I know the truth now. I know what you did. You lied to me for years. You stole my father from me, and I let you. But no more. Her eyes widened. For the first time, she looked shaken, not by me, but by him. The son she had turned into a weapon was no longer on her side. He stepped toward me, his hand resting firmly on my shoulder. This man is my father, and I will not stand by while you destroy his name again. Her lips quivered, her pride crumbling in front of everyone. She searched the faces around her, hoping for support, but found none. The relatives who once clung to her words now turned away, ashamed. The same people who had mocked me now whispered against her. I didn't shout. I didn't rise in anger. I simply sat still, calm, my silence speaking louder than her desperate cries. Because dignity does not need noise. It needs only truth. Her power, her influence, her pride. It all drained away that night, piece by piece, until nothing remained but the hollow shell of a woman who had built her empire on lies. Justice had come, not by my hand, but by the weight of truth. As the gathering ended, I walked out with my son by my side. For years I had walked in the shadows, humiliated and alone. But now, under the same lights where I was once mocked, I carried myself with dignity. I didn't need her to admit her wrongs. I didn't need her to bow. The silence of the room, the shame in her eyes, the respect in the faces that turned toward me, that was enough. Justice had been served. And it came not through revenge, but through patience, through truth, and through the quiet strength of a man who refused to break. Months passed and the wounds of the past began to settle into scars. Life did not erase what had been done to me, but it gave me something greater, respect. Slowly returned, and dignity, finally restored. When the invitation came for a family celebration, I hesitated at first. Memories of that wedding night still haunted me. The humiliation, the whispers, the smirks. But this time, something felt different. And it was. The hall was smaller, humbler than the glittering palace of the wedding. Yet the moment I walked in, I felt the warmth. No cold stares, no mocking smiles. Instead, genuine greetings, nods of welcome, relatives rising to shake my hand. The air was lighter, filled not with arrogance but with laughter that rang true. They guided me to the head table. For a moment I froze, the memory of my silent exit flashing in my mind. But this time there was no shame, no rejection. My son himself pulled the chair out for me, his hand firm on my shoulder as he said, "Father, sit here. This is your place." My chest tightened, not with pain but with something I thought I had lost forever. Pride. I sat, my back straight, my head high, surrounded by respect that once seemed impossible. The music played softly, not as a performance, but as a gentle melody. Children laughed, running between tables. Conversations flowed easily, free of poison. And when I looked beside me, I saw my son standing tall, no longer blinded by lies, and his bride at his side. Her pride was gone, her face softened, her eyes lowered in humility. She did not smirk at me, she did not whisper venom. Instead, she greeted me with respect, a quiet nod that carried something close to apology. I didn't need her words. Her silence spoke enough. The night unfolded in a way I had once dreamed of. Guests came to me, not to whisper mockery, but to honor me. They spoke of strength, of patience, of dignity. One relative said, "You endured more than any man should, and yet here you are, standing taller than all of us." Their words didn't inflate me with arrogance. They healed me. As I looked around the room, I realized how far I had come from that night of shame. Once I slipped quietly through doors, my head bowed, the sound of laughter chasing me like knives. Now I sat openly at the center, the laughter around me like music to my soul. My son leaned close, his voice soft, filled with emotion. "I should have done this years ago. I should have stood by you then. But tonight, I promise, I will never let you walk alone again." I placed my hand over his, feeling the truth in his words. For the first time in many years, I allowed myself to believe it. That night, as I listened to the music, as I shared food and stories, as I saw respect reflected in every face around me, I understood something. Humiliation may scar a man, but it does not define him. Dignity once buried can rise again, and when it does, it shines brighter than all the chandeliers in the world. I want to speak to you now, not as a man broken by betrayal, but as a father who has walked through fire and come out the other side. When I think back on the years I endured, the slammed doors, the cruel whispers, the night I was cast into the rain, I realized something. Humiliation is heavy, but it cannot destroy the soul of a man who refuses to let go of his dignity. They tried to strip me of everything. My home, my pride, even my son. And for a long time, I believed they had succeeded. But here I stand. Time has taught me that betrayal, no matter how sharp, does not last forever. Lies, no matter how polished, cannot survive the weight of truth. And pain, though it may bend your spirit, cannot break it if you hold firm to who you are. I carried wounds for years, silent and invisible. I watched the boy I raised turn away from me, his heart poisoned against his own father. I saw my ex-wife gloat, the bride's family sneer, and relatives treat me as if I were nothing. But through all of that, I chose to remain steady. I did not scream. I did not beg. I endured. And in the end, it was patience that saved me. Patience and faith in truth. When the masks finally fell, when the bride's family was exposed, when my ex-wife's lies crumbled, I realized justice doesn't always come in thunder and lightning. Sometimes it comes quietly. It comes in the shifting of whispers, in the lowering of heads, in the tears of a son who finally sees clearly. I have learned that revenge is loud, but dignity is louder. That a man who walks with truth, no matter how slowly, will always outlast those who build their lives on deceit. So to you who listen to my story, let me leave you with this. Never let betrayal convince you that you are worthless. Never let humiliation bury your dignity. Never let lies silence your truth. You may be mocked. You may be cast out. You may even be called a failure by the very people you gave your life to. But if you hold on, if you endure, the day will come when truth will rise and respect will return. I lost everything once, but I found myself again. And I found that dignity, once regained, shines brighter than any crown of wealth or pride. In the end, truth stands taller than lies. And respect. Respect is the crown. No one can steal. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of the story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing